last week, and I heard you did a really good job, Justin. People liked what you said and how you said it, and I appreciate your responding to that late notice and request. And the first time Justin has preached here in our church, but probably won't be the last time either. And for Kent Thomas, who came the week before Memorial Day weekend and preached for us, it's good to have Kent back in our community. I think he's loved by lots of people here in our town. There is a mistake in your bulletin. I just want you to realize that on the insert about the Spoken For Quartet, I think it says June the 13th, and that should be June the 23rd. We hit the wrong key there, and they're coming not this next Sunday, but the next Sunday after that. And on that Sunday when they come here, we're going to have we're dismissing Sunday school. We're going to have a brunch during that in-between time in our worship services, and they're going to perform a concert here at the 9 o'clock service and the 11 o'clock service, and then later that night they're going to have a full-blown concert here, a Spoken For Quartet from Branson, Missouri on Sunday, June 23rd. So keep those dates straight. And also, that's kind of a good opportunity to invite people to come to our church. You know, sometimes God talks to me in unusual places. Not too long ago, I was taking a walk in my neighborhood in the evening and began to think about the sermon I was going to preach that next Sunday, and it all came to me in a flash. In a 2.25 mile, I had my entire sermon all worked out in my mind. The next day I came in and I just wrote everything out, just remembered it so clearly and freshly, and it's amazing sometimes how God can do that. Normally it takes days for me to get my sermon, but on that evening it took about 40 minutes. It just came like a flood. This past Tuesday night, not night, but evening after work, I was mowing my yard, and I was thinking about this sermon I'm going to be doing today. And I kind of began by chastising myself for selecting the topic where I've changed in my thinking. Why would you pick a topic like that? You know, I did that about 3 months ago, trying to anticipate what I'm going to be preaching on in advance, and that was kind of a hard subject, and you have to really think about that. It could even be controversial, but I said, okay, I'll just go ahead and I'll just think about that. Where have I changed in my thinking? Has there been some place that I have evolved or just changed, or something that's become more apparent than it used to be? I've really been pretty conservative all of my life. When I was in seminary, my entering class of seminary, about 100 people, we took a poll on people who supported the death penalty. And I was one of 17 out of a class of about 100 that supported the death penalty. I thought of the death penalty as kind of like physician-assisted suicide. You know, when someone there's no hope and their life is about to end, and the doctor can kind of give them that extra dose of whatever it is that puts them over the edge and their life ends. And I thought of capital punishment in the sense that if our laws say that if you willingly and deliberately, intentionally take another person's life, your life will be taken from you. And so if that should happen, they're found guilty of that, then the state is only sort of assisting them in their own suicide, because if they didn't want to die, they should never have taken another human life. But in time, I began to change my feelings about capital punishment, and came to a place where I had more and more difficulty with that, and it just somehow didn't seem to square in my thinking that we Christians ought to be associated that intentionally with the taking of human life. So now I'm kind of in favor of life in prison without parole for those people. And actually, I guess it's less expensive to do that. I used to be a proponent of abortion. When I graduated from college in my environmental sciences, I really was a pro-abortionist and thought that was the way that we're going to have to control the world's population, that women who got pregnant and their parents that didn't want to have a child, that the world was so horribly overcrowded that we needed to control our population. And if we didn't control our population, we're going to outstrip all the resources of our world, and there'd be more famine, more hunger, more disease. And so I was actually in favor of abortion, but in time I changed and turned away from abortion. Just, again, felt really uncomfortable that I just didn't think that Christianity needed to be associated with the taking of human life intentionally like that somehow that just didn't square with my understanding of how it is that we are to live our lives. I used to believe in the criminalization of drug usage and drug selling, that was a scourge upon our land, and people who are caught selling drugs or using drugs ought to face really stiff penalties for that crime. And, you know, I just really have evolved into thinking that we need to legalize drug usage now, that we failed in our war against drugs, and we're not stopping people using drugs, and the drug trade is so lucrative. I've been kind of paying attention to what the drug cartels are doing in Mexico, south of the border, and was shocked at the violence and extreme brutality that the drug cartels using to enforce and protect their business. And a lot of innocent people are getting killed in Mexico, judges and prosecuting attorneys and journalists, people who are handing down sentences for these drug lords and people who are killing people, putting them away in prison. Those people are being targeted and assassinated. A lot of good people are dying because Americans are using drugs, and they'll keep on buying it no matter what it is. And so indirectly, a lot of the drug users in our country they're indirectly responsible for the murder of a lot of good and innocent people. And maybe if we legalized drug usage like we did alcohol back in Prohibition days or after Prohibition and control it and tax it and maybe take the incentive out for the mega millions of dollars that are in the drug trade. I changed. I've been changing in some ways of how I view things. And don't all of us do that? As we get kind of older, don't we kind of modify some of our stances? Maybe when we were younger, we see things more in black and white. And then as the older we get, we see maybe there are some shades of gray. And sometimes we have to choose between the lesser of two evils. And life can be complicated. And the more we see, the more we know, and maybe modifies the way that we think. I used to be a warrior in our denomination in the interdenominational wars that took place at annual conference. Every annual conference, bitter fighting among liberals and conservative Christians. Well, we just really went at each other with tooth and nail. And it was a bloody. I'd come out of annual conference discouraged and angry and upset and what a waste of time that was. And it was just made everybody really feel bad. Back in the early days of my ministry, I kind of believed that our church or denomination had turned the wrong direction. We had lost sight of our primary focus, which is making disciples for Jesus Christ. We seemed to focus almost entirely on changing government, modifying government, lifting up social causes and fighting to get these things done and fighting injustice and inequalities. And we kind of forgot about evangelism. And I just thought we'd got misguided. And I saw people who differed with me as kind of my opponents within our denomination, and I thought they were actually destroying the United Methodist Church. They were just hurting it so badly that somebody needed to stand up and confront and stand for our doctrines and the truth as I understood it and saw it. I was there to prevent that from happening. I joined a group of Methodist ministers called the Evangelical Association of United Methodist Ministers, the Missouri West Conference. Boy, that's a mouthful, isn't it? And we promoted three things 35 years ago. We thought that evangelism ought to be the primary focus of the Methodist Church in Missouri. The St. Paul School of Theology, which is located in Kansas City, should have a full-time professor of evangelism, which it did not. We thought that's pretty stupid. If evangelism is the most important thing that we do as Christians, shouldn't we have a seminary that has somebody teaching seminarians that? And we had a kind of a ministerial emergency fund. It had about $1 million in it. And we thought as long as there are no emergencies, they ought to take the interest out of that fund, which would be about $100,000 a year, and start a new church every single year with the money from that kind of a slush fund. I have to admit that for espousing those causes that I and others were seen as troublemakers, rebels, rabble-rousers, we were looked down upon as disturbing the peace of the conference, because those were not the goals of our denomination back then. I'm really proud to say that today with our new bishop, and he's not really a new bishop anymore, he's been here 9 years, but all of that, he's incorporated all of those things into his agenda, where evangelism and making disciples for Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world is the primary focus of our denomination anymore. And I'm really proud of that. But I really got tired of the fighting. I just didn't feel good to be fighting other Christians. And things began to change a little bit in the way I thought about that. And Bishop Handy got to select the people who was on the board of ordained ministry. There's 30 people, and every quadrennium, every 4 years, he would select those 30 people, and he intentionally created a board that was 15 conservatives and 15 liberals. So nobody had a majority. That if anything was going to get done, we'd have to work and compromise and fight and work it out in order to get the business of the conference done. And in that whole process, everybody was uncomfortable at first, but then we began to learn more about each other, and we saw that in a lot of areas we had more common ground than we had disagreements. And there was a member of that board named Paul Jones, who's a theology professor at St. Paul School of Theology. I had seen him as the arch enemy of the United Methodist Church. We became friends. He went to a monastic retreat outside Aspen, Colorado, and had a life transforming experience. He became a very deeply spiritual person. And I really responded and resonated with his spirituality and discovered that we had a lot of things in common, and we weren't as far different as I thought we had been. And then I began to see the social causes. Maybe there were some reasons why people were fighting for those things, and then maybe I should be thinking more about that as well. Didn't Jesus reach out to the marginalized, the people who were suffering the most? Didn't he say those who we should be taking care of? And he hung out with the scandalous type of people, and that maybe that was important as well. Well, I think today our bishop has we don't talk about social issues anymore. And we talk about the main thing, keeping the main thing, which is evangelism and church growth and having healthy, vital, vibrant congregations. That's what we talk about today, and we're all kind of getting on that bandwagon. And so we're not fighting each other like we used to, and I feel really a lot better about that. But as I was mowing my yard last Tuesday, I began to think, well, where really has my mind changed besides some of those social issues? And it's not so much that my mind has changed, but that something has kind of taken on precedence in the way I think today. And I guess what has disturbed me, and where I've been kind of coming to this over a period of months, is that I think all too often worldly values kind of trump Christian behavior inside the church. And too many times we talk about each other disparagingly, or that we spread malicious gossip, or untrue stories, or half-true stories. Sometimes we attack, belittle, undermine, and plot. And that shouldn't be taking place in the Church of Jesus Christ. So I want to look at that passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which we call the love chapter. But in chapter 12, the chapter right before that love chapter, the Apostle Paul talks about spiritual gifts. And he mentions many of the spiritual gifts that God is going to give us when we come to faith and the Holy Spirit comes inside of us, that He gifts us with gifts so that we can continue to do the things that Jesus began. Extraordinary type of gifts that had we not received them, we wouldn't be able to be as successful and effective as we would be with those gifts. But then in the next chapter, the love chapter, he talks about, as important as all those gifts are, if you are not filled with love, then all those spiritual gifts become kind of meaningless. If you talk in a heavenly language, a language of men and of angels, but you don't have any love, then you become just a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Just talk. That's all it is talk. If love's not there. If you can prophesy and tell people about the good news, but you have a hateful spirit, it'll undermine your testimony. If you have all knowledge and faith so as to remove mountains but are not filled with love, just meaningless, empty. If you're generous, but your generosity is combined with an attitude that's negative and demeaning, then it undermines your own generosity. So spiritual gifts without love kind of lose their value, lose their importance. Then he kind of talked about what is love. And he defined love in that chapter 13. He says love is patient. It's patient with other people. It's kind. It's magnanimous and generous. Your love just is overflowing. It's not contained, but it's shed, it's spread abroad. Your spirit should be humble and modest. You should be gracious with other people, pleasant, selfless, patient, trusting. That's the kind of love that Jesus had, and that's the kind of love that we ought to have. Those are all characteristics that should describe every one of us. When people who look at us and they know that we're Christians, they should know that we're Christians because that should define who we are and our character as the followers of Jesus Christ. Paul goes on to say, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I reasoned like a child, I thought like a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. In other words, when you're young, you're immature. When you grow up, you should be mature. When you're not a Christian, you shouldn't behave like a Christian. But when you become a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, you need to start living and acting like a Christian and a follower of Jesus Christ. Paul said, pursue those qualities of love. When we're filled with God's Spirit, then God's Spirit witnesses with our spirit about things that we need to know. And it informs us the difference between right and wrong. We know. There's no excuse. We know the difference between right and wrong. We know what we ought to do, and we ought to do that. And you need to set your mind on those things. You need to focus your mind. Think about the noble things and the right things, not the wrong things. Pursue those things that are of the greatest, highest quality.